We're going to be talking with Mr. Joey Gurwin, so give him a play. So I got this slideshow. I was Facebook stalking, Instagram stalking, and everything last night just to put up some pictures. So as you see, if something comes up, we can reference that. We can talk about some of the people who were in the pictures. But yeah, nice mic collection. So yeah, so I first, Oranjudio came, I think Workbook and Oranjudio, I don't think overlapped very much at all. And knew the studio and was excited that, because it means that things are healthy, right, when the studio can launch. So I never, if we overlap, never saw another studio as a competition. It's always good, right? That means things are healthy. It means we have a healthy music scene when studios are opening. And in fact, I remember talking to, and I say this phrase super loosely, like my attorney, but it's the guy I went to college with who was really smart, who I would call up and pull favors from, who got his law degree. And he's like, dude, there's so, like, I see all the paperwork. There's so many quote unquote studios in Columbus, like it's ridiculous. But so Oranjudio was a really sort of interesting name. I like that. There's also, I think they're still around, and I was like, well, that's a better name than, and I don't mean any disrespect to this studio. It's just the weirdest name, Moo Pigface. I'm going to record a Moo Pigface. I was like, why would you do that? Do we have to do anything to turn these on? Click the button. So I'm going to give you one else.
Check, a little easier.
Yeah, so Oranjudio, yeah, really cool. So, and I know we've been lucky, really had a good establishing relationship. So, Joey, talk about your, real quick, your starting about age 6, when music was, as far as like, hey, I like this music thing, it's pretty neat, this recording thing, and then a step to like, and I'm going to put sink a bunch of money into the studio.
I'd like to, I guess everything like grew really organically for me, and I think the studio in general. My obsession with music and recording probably, was around 6. I had a Walkman. My dad had records. I couldn't steal my dad's records and walk around with a Walkman. So I was, dubbing records on the tape when I was like, 6 years old. And I guess that would have been the start of it. I also grew up, my mom followed the Grateful Dead around. And so I grew up with a bunch of tapers, and they would go to these shows and set up stereo mics, and the Dead allowed people to, they set aside taper sections for people to do that. And so hanging around those guys at a young age, hearing the differences, hearing conversations about tape generations and how this room was way too boomy of a room for them to be playing in, them adjusting their mics based on the rooms that they were in, stuff like that. So I guess it was integrated into my normal lexicon. That was my life at a pretty young age. And as far as Oranjudio goes, I like to say that we built Oranjudio, the last one, and after we moved, the current one, basically out of necessity. Like you record out of your house or out of wherever for as long as you can, then you start, doing freelance work out of other studios, and then eventually you grow into a point of necessity where you're like, I kind of need my own space. I have a kid or a wife, and she's sick of being kicked out of the house, so I can track drums in the living room, like whatever it is. And so you build a space, and you start off with the gear that is the necessities to be able to do what you do, and then as new necessities come up, you get another piece of gear, or as you just allow it to grow on its own, as opposed to, I suppose, just I'm gonna graduate the music tech program at Capital University, talk some bank into giving me
Right.
a $500,000 loan and do like a full ground up
Right.
build out.
That's a really similar story of my own. Is that started buying gear in school, and then researching. All right, I'm gonna buy a microphone, and then then I started working on signal path, as far as a good preamp and a good compressor. Then eventually moved into a house with an absentee landlord, drilled holes in the floor. Okay. The one roommate moves out, that's fine, now we're down to one roommate, and then, the couch has to go, and the fish tank's really noisy, we have to unplug it every time we do drums, so let's just get rid of the fish tank, and, all the dishes rattle when we do bass guitar, so let's get all rid of the dishes, and, that's very similar. You're like, all right, we've reached ridiculous with this capacity. It's cool, but because overhead is low, that's the bonus of that, but then you reach a point where you're like...
Yeah, you reach a ceiling, just like when you, the first, microphone or pre or whatever that you get when you first start recording, you don't know how like crappy the top end sound,
Right.
When you're first using it, and it's a great utility for you for years and years and years, and then like just one day you just like obviously the equipment probably doesn't hit its ceiling. You just begin to recognize the ceiling of the equipment, and you're like, man, I've ridden this horse as much as I can, or probably longer than I should. I'm going to now invest in. Now that I'm hearing the shortfalls of what this can do for me, now I'm going to slightly advance it.
Yeah, the key is to not sell anything. And for me, all that early gear became part of my live rig.
Yeah.
So all those early microphones that were kind of not great, they would go into the live box. And the signal processing that I initially bought for the studio went into my signal processing box that I would take with me live and plug in and let me do that all live just fine. So So let's go about. You want to go dark? You want to go Oranjudio Darkest Days?
Oh, sure.
So this is I think it's a good story. Some of you may know this, but I'll let. This is a pretty low point for the studio. Right now it's doing really well, so it ends happy. So let's.
So I guess it would have been, I don't know, about 5 years ago, 4 years ago, something like that. We had the 5-cent version of the story is the studio got broken into, a shit ton of gear got stolen. Sorry for cursing. I'll do it again, I promise. There's really no other way to describe it.
Totally different location.
Yeah, totally right. We were in a different place than we are now. And the sidebar, really unfortunate thing is like that's a great area now. Like, I still every now and again go into the old studio, which is now a coffee roasting place, and it's just like beautiful coffee shops everywhere, and I'm just like, man, why wasn't this neighborhood this awesome when the studio was here? But yeah, we had a break-in. It was more than likely, actually it was, I don't need to be legal about it. It was a former client of the studio, which it often is.
How did they get in?
So they initially tried to tunnel in through the ceiling. I don't know, I thought that they were like doing some like Ocean's 11 or something.
Really want that drummer.
And then after, I don't know, it was raining that night. It was early December, like cold rain, like they really wanted that stuff. And after the failed attempt to tunnel in through the ceiling, they used some like plasma cutter or whatever to rip the exterior door off in our alarm. And this is a good lesson for everybody. Put your alarm on the first door, not the second door, because as a former client of the studio, they knew that as long as you didn't open that interior door, that the alarm wouldn't get triggered, because we had turned off motion detectors months before, because I don't know if any of you guys have had motion detectors in your homes or whatever, but they go off randomly, like whenever the AC will kick on, or like you'll leave power conditioner on in the studio and a light will flicker, or who knows. And so you eventually get really sick of just false alarm calls at 3 o'clock in the morning. So we turned off our motion detectors, and the person, being a former client at the studio, knew that as long as he didn't open that interior door, that alarms would not be triggered. So we ripped off the exterior door and then used a sawzall or whatever to cut a hole through the interior door. So he got in without opening it, and then took his sweet time, just like really, I don't know, like probably made pancakes in there while just like really slowly and deliberately, like unracking everything, going to the mic closet and being like, what mics am I going to steal today? I'll take that one. And it was
So like the Grinch.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fluffing the stocking.
Yeah, I get back and there's like, just a beat up 57 left on the floor, just a ton. But yeah,
And hard drives, right?
Huh?
And hard drives?
Hard drives, which was by far the worst part of the entire thing. Which was, we all learn, and I hate to say this, we all learn eventually a hard lesson on how to properly manage data. And
don't we? Don't we? I'm looking at some of you today.
and those of you that haven't learned yet, you will, and it will suck. I promise. And I had already learned, always back up to an external and track to a different external, but people get lazy. And that's a huge thing. Laziness will kill you every single time. So I had everything backed up to my, additional external, which I left for the night because in the studio, you're like, it's 11 o'clock, I just want to get home. I need to be back here at 9 o'clock in the morning. What could possibly happen to this external that's just plugged in?
On a cold, rainy December night.
Yeah, exactly. That's what can happen, So they come in, they steal the computer and all the hard drives that are attached to it, and I have the unenviable task of calling all the clients whose projects are not done. Some of them, one of them who's like, that I had finished that night at 11 p.m. To say, hey, so about that record we've been working on for the past year, it's gone, and then spending the next whatever, I'm not a dick, I still want to do right by my clients. So spending the next year of my life coming out of my own pocket, because at this point I don't have your data, I don't have your music, I don't even have a studio anymore I don't even have the gear to retract this stuff. So I'm going to go to, a peer's studio, rent it out for a couple of days, and, and schedule a complete, 2.0 of these people's projects. It was a rough one. It was certainly rough. There was people who I didn't even, like one cat, I didn't even know if he was ever going to play guitar. We finished his project and he had like some horrible hand surgery, and so he wasn't even sure if he was ever going to be, able to play again. And I was just like, I was in tears on my front porch talking to this guy. But the story has a happy ending.
Eventually.
Eventually, all stories have happy endings. So after a year or so, insurance doesn't cover data. Insurance also depreciates gear. No matter how cool and vintage you think something is, the insurance company just sees a preamp from 1980. You know what I mean? So they're like, well, that thing's 30 years old. They treat it like it's, you know, a Chevy Caprice that you drove in high school that's worth like, you know, $50. They're just like, you know, so eventually insurance will pay you 20 cents on the dollar for, you know, for what you lost, and, you know, luckily it was enough for us to buy drywall to start on a new studio.
Anyone have any questions on that story before? Good.
Get anything back? I don't know.
Did I get anything back?
Yeah.
You put out requests for that. I mean, you
Yeah.
tried a number of different avenues. I remember seeing Craigslist posts and they tried really like,
I put
here, give us the data.
I put out like, I was putting out like rewards for thousands of dollars. Like, I don't care, just give me my hard drives. I won't ask any questions. You can come to my house wearing a clown mask and just hand me the stuff. I don't care. I will keep the police out of it. I'm done. I just want the hard drives, and they never showed up. And like the really frustrating thing was, like, everybody knew exactly who had done it, and so the curious part is, so when this break-in happened, everybody in the city was, you know, the city was super awesome about it. All the studio owners, the music scene, everybody was just whatever they could do to help. And 2 days after the break-in, so we had this like the Palooza 251, and they had taken the power supply, and it's a tube mic, and so they had taken the power supply and they had taken the microphone itself, and they had left the cable just, you know, because they didn't think to steal a bunch of cables while they were in there, or any cables, and it's not like a mic that's all over the place. It's, you know, there was one other one that a dude in Ohio, like, if I needed a new cable, I would have had to call John Peluso and, you know, get a new cable. And so I got a phone call from Eric over at Guitar Center, like 2 days after the break-in. And he's like, you guys had that Peluso, right? And I was like, had. And he's like, well, and I heard through the grapevine that you guys are looking at this one individual for, you know, he was the one who was in there the day before acting suspiciously, whatever. Everybody knows to be looking at this guy. And I was like, yeah, dude, what else? And he's like, well, he's in Guitar Center right now, and he's trying to buy the cable for that Peluso mic. And I was like, oh my God, we have broken the case. And so like we called the cops, me and Eric called the cops, and we're like, and he's also like trying to buy the, you know, the Matty cable that he had left, like basically anything that was left at the studio. 2 days later, he's at Guitar Center trying to purchase. And so we called the cops and we're like, listen, this guy's trying to order a 7-pin Peluso cable. It can all, like, you can only get those from John Peluso. And they're like, cool story. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. No, like, this is like elementary, my dear Watson, you know? And they're like, it's not illegal for anybody to try to buy a microphone cable. And I was like, this is the dude. And I was like, listen, if somebody like stole a Lamborghini but left the wheels behind, right, and like showed up the next day at the Lamborghini dealership and was like, I need these wheels, and it was already the guy that was the suspect in the crime, you might want to talk to him about it. And they're like, conversation. Yeah, just just talk to him. And they're like, he's doing nothing illegal here, sir. And at that point was when I realized that the cops have much more important things on their plate, or at least that's what I told myself, than my missing compressors and monitors and stuff. And so at that point I was like, listen, this stuff is gone. It's gone for good. And I stopped trying to go down the avenue of retrieving what was lost and go about rebuilding something new and different and hopefully better.
So let's talk about that. So we'll turn the corner. So you are looking at a just wasted studio space with a big hole in the interior door.
And a hole in the ceiling.
Right. So there's, what you say, there's 4, were there 3 at that point, or 4?
At that point there was 2. At that point it was Zach, and I had bought into the company like after the Summit move, which was the initial studio space, which was like super tiny. And yeah, so at that point, and Zach, who really doesn't even he doesn't even record. He like thought we're gonna build a studio on Wharf and get Joey and Drew to run it. Was essentially, and in that experience, he realized that like building a studio as a business venture, when you're not working in audio, is a money suck. And so we sit down. He's like Joey, I don't see a point in rebuilding. And at this point, the building is not even usable. So even if I like gather up a bunch of gear and throw it in the building, the landlord knew that he could get more money because it's an up and coming neighborhood. And so I knew pretty quickly that if I wanted Oranjudio to continue, that a new location had to be found, a new build out had to happen, and all those things cost a lot of money, a lot more money than any of us as an individual have. And so out of necessity, we came together, all the people who Oranjudio was their living, their bread and butter. Like, we're no longer just like workers here. We are like, we need to be partners. And so we all, just knuckled down and pooled our resources, whether that be what we have in our bank accounts, or who we could call favors on, or if we could get investors or loans or whatever it was. I just knew that was my own, that was my only work. Like, essentially, outside of music, I'm unemployable. I promise. and so I was like, what am I going to do? If I'm not, if I'm not in the music, industry, I'd be lucky if I can even get a job bagging groceries at Kroger or whatever. Like, nobody cares, how, about your kick-ass drum sounds when you're going to, get a 9.
The eggs go on top. Do you get a saddle when the eggs are at the bottom?
And so yeah, I knew that this is what I had to do. It was either do this or go work at somebody else's studio, which at that point was a possibility. I explored that, but I also I hadn't worked for somebody else for such a long time that whole change in dynamics seemed pretty weird to me. And I spent the next 8 months doing Walmart commercials, just to raise the money to finance the building of the studio. So every twice a week I'm with some camera crew in some random Walmart Walmart across the country, you know, doing boom mic operations and, you know, going home and, you know, editing the audio and then going out the next day and doing it again. And, you know, the only good thing that you will ever hear me say about Walmart is that, you know, just through their media campaigns, I was able to, you know, steady the ship and you know, invest what had to be invested into building a new studio.
As we're going, if you have a question, definitely raise your hand. I mean, I can lead the conversation, but definitely, if you have any questions. Anyone have anyone so far? Go ahead.
You might get this question a lot, but where did the name Oranjudio come from? I know it's like super random and has no pertinence, but
There's a bunch of legends out there. No. So we were, talking about what to name a studio. It was the conversation of what to name a studio. And somebody who had been taking like a bunch of like marketing and design stuff said that a great way to make a name stick in somebody's brain so that they remember it is to attach it to a color. That using a color will cause it to trigger somebody's memory or make them feel a certain way. I don't know much about marketing. And we had it'll eventually come up. We have this orange Baldwin, which is, you know, a super cool kind of honky-tonk piano.
Oh, you guys didn't paint that orange?
No.
It can't be orange?
Yeah, that has, as far as I'm concerned, that piano came from, you know, magma. and was orange. And yes, we have this orange, but Orange Studio sounds kind of whack. And the NAMM show just happened, and out west there's, you know, Orange Julius is kind of all over the place. And you say Orange Studio and Orange Julius enough times back to back, and Oranjudio is what happens. So there you go.
Yeah, I figured you just painted it. I mean, I know the piano's there. I'm like, that's pretty cool to take a bright and piano orange. It can't be that way.
That piano was born orange as far as I'm concerned.
So, looking around for, so investors come together and the engineers who are just then probably freelancing. So Zach is out, or is he still in, or then a couple of people like, hey, we can help pool money, we can make this happen.
So Zach was like, the initial conversation was Zach just signed the entire LLC. It's just like, it's yours, do with it what you want. And which was essentially him throwing in the towel. And I was like, no, that's not the way we're doing it. And he's like, fine, if you want to do this, it's your baby. Break it that, you know, you have the company's yours now. Break it down, whoever, if Brandon, for example, wants some sweat equity and, you need him to, help you build, then throw him some shares. If Drew is gonna, bring some of his gear, and I'm like the share fairy, I'm just like, you get 10%, you get 10%, please just let's make this thing happen. And luckily I have a good friend who is super successful in the medical industry or whatever in Miami, and I was down there visiting, and he was just amazing about it, and he's like, just tell me what you need. And I was like, I need a studio. And he's like, no, really, just come up with some figures, and we'll figure out how you can, what makes sense as far as, how to pay you back and all that stuff. and we figured it out, and so I got a personal business loan, I guess, and everything just sort of, just start hitting it from there. And we ran out of that initial loan, I think, way earlier than expected, and then it's, oh, well, we need more insulation. Well, you're going to have to wait until Walmart pays my invoice because we have zero money for insulation. It was building a studio properly for, as if we weren't paying any construction guys to do it, if we could do it ourselves. Right. We weren't, we were bargain shopping, if we could go to Costco to buy green goo, we were
This is the exact same story of workbook. So, yeah, credit cards, personal loans, because those are low interest, not. And then that money runs out, and then you're like, what do we do now?
Yeah. I'm going
to get another credit card. The answer is yes. Yes, you can. Great. Yeah. I mean, whatever it takes. Pulling friends, everyone's like, everyone wanted to help paint. I'm like, that's like way down the line.
Yeah.
I need, I got a case of caulk, that I need to put, the whole studio has to be.
Yeah, your friends all pizza and beer is great for getting everybody to come paint. Pizza and beer is not great when you're trying to talk people into helping you grind down a cement floor.
In August.
Yeah, I'm not doing. Yeah, and what is essentially a warehouse with zero ventilation.
Right. No AC. Been there. So yeah, go ahead, Tim.
Was Oranjudio just like an open space that you put all the walls and everything in?
Yeah.
So you just completely built it all in a little space.
Yeah, we found what the current Oranjudio was a like a car painting workshop. Okay. And so we went there.
It's workbook.
Really?
The second floor of a Packard dealership.
Yeah. So it was just like this wide open space, like corrugated aluminum ceilings or corrugated metal ceilings, concrete floor. But it had, wide. It was, a wide open space. It was a blank canvas.
How tall were the ceilings?
The ceilings were 18 feet, which allowed me to be able to completely
within a room.
Yeah, build a room with nice high ceilings. I think that the ceilings at the highest point in the studio are 14 feet now, maybe 14 and a half, and I still have, plenty of, insulation and air gap before I need to worry about the corrugated metal ceiling that is above. So
and to run the AC and heat.
Yeah, which was, also, a big thing, especially in a rental property, because whenever we sign like a 7 or 8 year lease, and good luck telling a guy who has been renting out industrial property to people who put a ceiling heater in and just paint cars or whatever it is, to be like, hey, so can I write in the lease that I need a specialized HVAC and I need separate runs for every single room because I need them to be isolated from the ventilation? He's just like, no, you're doing that out of your own pocket. And so the investing that much in an HVAC system, which is not cheap, when it comes down to it, an HVAC system for a studio can run just as much as your console is going to be, sometimes more. So yeah, that was.
You get educated on that stuff.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do.
So current incarnation. Let's talk about clients that sort of maybe there's not a typical day, but run me through maybe a typical week. What might a schedule look like at Oranjudio right now?
Right now, so what's really cool about the studio is that it sort of is. We are working on all sorts of different things at all sorts of given times. So I guess just, I'll say over the past couple of months or whatever, we will go from working with, a local jazz band doing a local jazz record, to regional and national touring acts. We have, we're a vendor now for Universal and Island Records. So when a artist for Universal needs to, do some tracking on some upcoming release, we're often a stop on their tour when they need to do that. So we've got to work with a bunch of, big, giant artists or whatever. We also do commercial work, so it's fun. So we did it was it was the day before, 2 days before the NFL draft. And I got a call in the morning like, hey, I need to book a voiceover for whatever, 4 hours. And I was like, okay, cool story, it's open. And then I get the scripts at like 8 o'clock, the next morning, an hour before the voiceover. And it's like whatever, visa script for Braxton Miller. And I was just like, whoa, that'll be an interesting day. And it was like, we'd already had like this trend of athletes come in to the studio for VO work. Like that week we had Gabby Douglas come in and do like a VO. And so it just seemed to be one of those weeks. And it was just hilarious. The entire experience was hilarious because like Braxton comes in and this dude's like whatever, a day away from being, a multi-millionaire in the NFL. And everybody in the studio is like, holy shit, Braxton Miller's coming. and Braxton Miller is like calling his friends and on like Snapchat, and he's like, holy shit, I'm in the studio. and so I go like, hey Braxton, can we get a picture? He's like, yeah, but first, can you get a picture of me like in the booth? Get a picture of me in front of this console? It was so interesting, and every time it's so interesting to see that the studio, no matter like how much of a magician or whatever somebody else seems to be, like when they have nothing to do with music or no experience in the studio, every time somebody walks in the studio, the reaction is the exact same. Like, holy shit, this is studio. And so we do a lot of like commercial voiceover work as well as music stuff. We also do custom music for limited brands and express at the studio. All sorts of stuff.
It's great.
Yeah.
Right. Multiple revenue streams come in.
Yeah.
I mean, that I think that's a big thing. It's nice. I was never in a position to say no to it. So like forensic audio, I have forensic audio.
Oh, yeah.
Books on CD, we were doing stuff from McGraw Hill, like enhanced CD-ROM web stuff, like, sure, bring it in, and,
learn, like, I'm not Quincy Jones yet, so I can't, especially early on, now there's projects that I say no to. Early on, you learn, and if there's one thing that I can impress on you guys right now, is that you are not too good for any work. Like, if somebody calls, when somebody called me when I was first starting, like, hey, I need you to, the answer was like, if they had a check, the answer was yes before they even finished their sentence. Before I even knew if I knew I could do it. I was saying yes and then freaking out and figuring out that how to do it and to make sure that I did it better than the last guy who did it. And that is kind of how, my professional life has gone is, say yes to the work and just make sure that you that you do a really, really good job. And if you said yes and you don't think that you can do a really good job, find somebody who you know could really do a damn good job and cut them in on that project and learn from them. The learning process by no means stops when you guys, get your, piece of paper from this university. In fact, that's really where the real shit starts happening. Because I don't know how, like, a session or whatever works at Capitol. I didn't go here, but I do know that in most audio schools, you're running a session with your classmates or with a group of classmates or with an instructor behind you. And it's, and it's easy, it's way easy to troubleshoot when you have like 6 classmates in the room with you and your instructor is also there, or you can call them. It's a completely different story where you have a client whose check is already cleared and you're the only person in the studio. Right. Because you will be the only person in the studio 95% of the time. And you need to create a situation where, like, you might be freaking out in your head, but, like, you still need to make sure that the client is comfortable, because if the client sees you freaking out, then, like, why am I even paying you? And so doing that stuff on your own, like, that's when that's when the real education, comes into play.
I think that's a great point. We didn't get to, but Independence Day is this weekend. One of the things that you have an advantage is that we are in Columbus, and we wanted to talk about this, but this is an amazing playground for music. So Saturday and Sunday, all day long, free concerts. I don't even know how many stages, 4 or 5 stages.
There's a lot of stages.
So look up Independence Day. You can look up Oranjudio. You can look up Joey. You guys need more information. Let's give him a round of applause.